USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Spotlight for Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. Each week we talk with a coach, player, administrator, or journalist about college hockey. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th, 2023 at Amalie Arena in Tampa. Secure your seats at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Two leagues head into their final weekend of the regular season this weekend. One of those is the NCHC, with a few things on the line.
Joining us now from the Grand Forks Herald, one of the friends of this show, friends of college hockey, Brad Schlossman. And Brad, I'll get to North Dakota because that has not been the prettiest story for you. And I know you cover the Fighting Hawks for your beat, but the NCHC, an interesting league this year because you have kind of clusters. You have a really good first place team, an eighth place team that's kind of not there, and then you have this 2-4 and 5-7. I feel like we have like Irish wake hours going on here when I say 2-4 and 5-7. But it's there are just these two slots that are really competitive within the league, and even heading into this final weekend, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think when I look at some of those slots in the standings, one of the things that jumps out to me is been able to push toward the top. One thing you notice is look at the impact that their transfers are having on their team. St. Cloud State is Grant Cruikshank, a fifth-year senior center. They add him in there. He's taking more faceoffs than anyone in the league, I believe. He's goal scorer, does about everything for them. Dominic Bassey's been great in net. They got Dylan Anhorn from Union. He was phenomenal. And then all of a sudden he suffered a season-ending injury. Look what's happened to St. Cloud since then. They've won maybe one of their last 7 games now, something like that. He was a big role player there. Western Michigan's a team that lost all their top scorers from last year. They should have taken a big step back. Well, all of a sudden, Carter Berger and Zach Galambos are on the blue line, and they're right back in it again. So I think some of those teams have really benefited from getting it right in the portal. Denver, even, 2 of their top 5 scorers are guys summer, Casey Dornbach and Tristan Brose. So I think what that's showing is it is really important to grab the right guys and, guys that can help, and it can make a big difference on your team. And I think that's something that's happened for some of the top end teams in the league.
When you look at Denver, I'll start there because they did a pretty good job of maybe not being dominant start to finish, but separating themselves. They clinched the Penrose Cup with more than a week to go in the regular season. How far do you think this team can go? Can they, maybe even think about repeating as national champs?
I think they can think about it for sure. I think if you win the NCHC, that's you're in a pretty good spot. I think what stands out about them is they have pretty good depth. I don't know if they rely on 1 or 2 guys. They can hurt you in a number of different ways. I think one guy that's really been overlooked this year on their team is Aiden Thompson, freshman forward. He missed the first month of the season, so his stats might not look quite as impressive as overall numbers, but look at his points per game, and he's over a point a game, I believe. He's a guy that's added an impact. Carter Mazur's having a nice year. Their 2 transfers have been pretty good. On the back end, they're pretty deep. I think they, another guy that's really never gets talked about on their team because he's undrafted and they have all those draft picks is Kyle Mayhew on D. When I've watched Denver this year, he's really stood out as a underrated guy that, if I'm an NHL team, I'm keeping a close eye on Kyle Mayhew as a free agent guy because I think he's been excellent for them. And Magnus Krohn has been good in net. So I think it's a team that doesn't have a lot of holes. And I think they are a threat to make a run in the tournament.
The next little slot is that 2 to 4 spot. Omaha right now in second place, and then you have Western Michigan, St. Cloud. They are tied for third. Is there one team of that trio that you think kind of stands out? I mean, you're looking at Omaha right now. They might be on top in second place, but they're actually on the outside of the NCAA bubble looking in.
Yeah, they've really been up and down at times this year. They've been more consistent lately, but I feel like Omaha's the team that they can go into Denver and sweep and you won't be surprised. And they're the team that can come home and Niagara can walk in there and sweep them and you won't be really that surprised. And that, they didn't sweep at Denver, but Niagara swept them in Omaha this year, and that they're a pretty good home team. And so, they are kind of up and down. They've gone to Simon Latkozy, the freshman goaltender, for the stretch run here, and he's been really good. Last year, Latkozy played in Madison in the USHL. Madison, not great team. And they went all the way to the Clark Cup finals. They made 3 upsets in the playoffs, and it was because of Simon Latkozy. So I think he's been a big impact guy for them. And, it'll be interesting to see. North Dakota played them earlier this season. They started Jake Kuharski, the American international transfer, both games. So I'll see. I'm assuming I'm going to see Simon Latkozy this weekend when they come here, and I'm curious to see how they play in front of them too.
The next tier, kind of 3 teams that have a little bit of difference. Minnesota Duluth, I know, had some injuries this year. North Dakota, consistently inconsistent. But then Colorado College, they are in a position this last weekend of the regular season where they could even jump into 5th place. That would be a big step forward for Chris Mayott's team. What do you see of that trio?
Yeah, I think North Dakota has started to gain consistency a little bit as of late. Their issue in the first half was they allowed way too many goals. They were giving up too many grade A chances. Their goaltenders weren't making enough saves. And, when you're giving up 5 or 6 goals in the game, you're not going to win. And that happened way too often for them. Offensively, they've been fine. They're probably hovering around 10 in the nation in goals per game. They have the number 1 power play in the country. So they've generated, but defensively, that has been the issue. Now, that has kind of turned. Drew DeRitter has kind of hit his stride as of late. He's been much more consistent. The guys in front of him have been much better. So I think they are a danger in the tournament simply because their defense, they're starting to figure it out. And offensively, when you have a power play at 30%, they can run up a score on you real quick. And so they're a threat there. CC's, they've played a lot of low scoring games. They're number 2 in the NCHC in fewest goals allowed in league play, only behind Denver. So they've had great goaltending from Caden Mbarico, their freshman goalie. They've defended really well, but they don't score. That's the big challenge. Outside of Hunter McCown, who's been fantastic, and I think NHL teams will be all over him in a month or less. They just don't have the offense yet. If they don't score 5 goals this weekend, they'll end as the lowest scoring team in NCHC history in goals per game. So they're playing these really low scoring games. For Tiger fans, though, their recruits are fantastic right now in the USHL. So it's coming. They've done a phenomenal job recruiting, but it might take a couple of years for them to push into the top half of the league. But I do think that's going to happen. And in Minnesota Duluth, all year long, I think they've been a team that doesn't have quite enough offense. And that really hurts when Blake Biondi goes out on top of that. They were struggling before he went out. Now they don't have him. But when I was running the numbers, defensively is what's shocking to me. They're usually a very defensive team. They're near, they've already allowed more goals in the NCHC this year than they ever have in the history of the league, in their history of the league. So it's not just offense. They're giving up too many right now, and they've been inconsistent as well.
Brad, you mentioned CC maybe being into the top half of the league in a couple of years. We're starting to see sort of a turnover in the conference. We got so used to seeing UMD and North Dakota near the top. Is this maybe what we should expect and maybe should be happy to see in the NCHC, some turnover from year to year?
Well, I kind of thought that was going to be the way the league was when it started. I looked at all the teams in there and they were all having tons of success at their where they were. And I thought, man, this is going to be wild from year to year. It's going to be really tight. There's not going to be a lot of difference. And it hasn't worked out that way. Only 3 teams have ever won the league. North Dakota's won it 5 times, Denver 3, St. Cloud 3. That's it. I expected more parity than there has been. Sometimes there has been, but even like when you look at the history of the quarterfinals and you have the 8 teams playing best of 3 series, the number of times the top 4 teams has won is way more than I would have expected when the league started. So, it'll be interesting to see how frequent the turnover is. I still think when I look at the commit lists for the future, Denver and North Dakota both have pretty good lists, but, I think CC is going to be a team that's pushing up toward the top of the league pretty soon based on what their recruits are doing.
More with Brad Schlossman in a moment. USCHO Spotlight is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida.
All right, class, it's the NCAA Men's Frozen Four. Welcome to Fandom 101. Want to help your team rule the rink? Here's your assignment. Lesson 1, go big for every goal. 2, when you bring it, bring enough for the whole class. And 3, attendance is encouraged, but passion is mandatory. The NCAA Men's Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Buy your tickets today at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Class dismissed.
We're back with hockey writer Brad Schlossman of the Grand Forks Herald. You talked a little bit about the portal and some key transfers helping out teams, and it's going to settle down a little bit in a couple of years when we get through the COVID years. But looking at the success teams have had with the portal, can you spot some patterns or some approaches teams are taking that make the portal work and not maybe disrupt a team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've tried to find that and find patterns on, where guys have come from that were successful, what their backgrounds are. And there's really not a lot of rhyme or reason necessarily. I know there are some teams that are, they might not want a guy from one of the smaller leagues, and then all of a sudden you see Zach Galambos go over to Western Michigan and just be a massive player for the Broncos. So it's really hard to point to one path being successful or one team. But, I think it'd be really tough to have success if you completely decide not to use the portal. I think you're tying a hand behind your back. I mean, you could probably ask Frank Serratori, he's a guy that can't get transfers, and it probably hasn't been easy. Some of these teams that can't get it, it's not easy. I know Jimmy, you've seen Griegels. He's a fantastic player, and so it's. I think there has to be a balance. I don't think you can grab 7 guys a year. I think that's just too much constant turnover. But I also don't think you can ignore. Grabbing a couple guys that can step in and impact your team right away.
Turning to kind of the bigger college hockey picture, there have been discussions over the years about what if college hockey could be sort of in its own federation within the NCAA. Well, we're running into a time where we're going to see a lot of turnover. We're seeing a lot of it. We've got a new NCAA president in Charlie Baker taking the reins. And what I think is really kind of remarkable is the changeover in commissioners. Next year, Don Lucia and Steve Metcalf are going to be the ones with the most tenure in their 3rd season. You've seen Heather Weems come in the NCHC, and then Michelle Morgan in Atlantic Hockey is kind of some groundbreaking changes, and plus a new ECAC commissioner. So given the turnover and so forth, what are some of the biggest things that you think college hockey really needs to accomplish over the next few years to ensure some long-term health?
Yeah, that is going to be fascinating. So many of those commissioners have been there so long, kind of institutions that have such deep knowledge of, the history and everything like that. I think the first thing sitting out there that's on everyone's mind is college hockey has so many independents right now. and it's so much more than they've had in the past. Where did these programs go? I think that's one of them. The other one, I think this is kind of out of the college hockey hands, but what happens with single sport conferences? Do they institute rules that, do they push off compliance down to conferences and things like that? And if they do, that's going to be tough to do for single sport leagues. And maybe you start seeing these leagues merge into larger leagues. Out here in the West, the question that's looming is, does the NCHC go under the Summit League's umbrella? A bunch of teams in the NCHC are institutions for their other sports. And guess who just became the Summit League commissioner? Josh Fenton. So I think the second he went there, everyone's eyebrows raised a little bit. And there's still some curiosity. What could happen? Could there be conference shuffling through that? At this point, the transformation committee hasn't gone as far as I thought they would. There were a lot of indications that they would have, 5 full-time assistant coaches or 5 full-time coaches on staff. Now it's going to 4, but they're not allowing volunteers. That counts as 1 year 4. So it's, almost the same. I think are they going to go to unlimited scholarships? I don't know if they're going to do that anymore. Everything seems to not go as far as they originally thought. So that makes me think there's still a ways to go. But if they do if they do have to force their way out of single sport leagues.
Back to the point you made just before about independence and needing leagues. We seem to be in a really difficult position to find that, although, Alaska has shown that you can have a successful season outside a league, and a couple of years ago, Arizona State. But we're sort of back in the logjam, I think, of where we were before the Big Ten formed, where you had, you've got Eastern leagues, you've got enough teams there to have one more league, and then the possibility of forming one out of some of the D2 programs. And then you've got all I guess we've got a league for Augustana, but Lindenwood needs to find a place in the Alaska schools and Arizona State. What are your thoughts on what should happen? Or maybe if you were the czar of college hockey, what you might make happen to try to find homes for everybody?
Yeah, I guess if I was the czar, I would do a completely, maybe not a complete reshuffle, but I would, reshuffle a lot of things. I think with some of the changes, one thing we've learned is the value of the regional rivalries and everything. I think one of the reasons some of those Big Ten teams have struggled to draw, including Minnesota, is they're playing a bunch of different teams. And, I think when you get to those regional rivalries, there are probably people who go to work in the Twin Cities, and they're going to work with a St. Cloud grad and a North Dakota grad and maybe a Duluth grad. And they know on Monday they're going to be they're going to follow the series. I think there's a lot of banter. Now there's, I don't know if there is that anymore. I think it's been tough. I think one of the reasons the NCHC had success is because most of those teams are playing the same schedules they were before. I don't think the NCHC went into creating their league thinking that, but I think that has been something that fell into their laps. I think originally they were looking at adding teams from all over the country. It didn't work out that way, and I think they're probably lucky it didn't. I think that's been a big thing. I don't know where the Alaska schools go. I don't see them going to the NCHC right now. They just got essentially booted from the CCHA. I think Arizona State's got to be on the verge of finding a place. That's a really attractive option, new rink, great place to visit, easy place to get to. Lindenwood, I would think their geography is their challenge because they've got everything else. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting, but I would say when looking at aligning schools in leagues, regionalization is important for fan bases.
Brad, when I was going through the teams in the league in the NCHC right now, the one I intentionally left off was Miami, down at the bottom of the league again this year. Strong, and when you talk to Chris Bergeron, and it almost feels like he doesn't want to be in the league. He says the travel's a lot for them. I think he misses the old CCHA, and now seeing the CCHA back together probably makes him miss it even more. Have you heard much in terms of rumblings on what the future for Miami might be in that league? And might there be some sort of a swap? I know we've heard thrown around Minnesota State and Miami getting swapped for each other. Would that be something that makes sense for the league?
That's something I'll be keeping my eye on for sure. I don't think Miami has really been too coy. The fact that they would rather be in the CCHA than the NCHC. I think that's been, expressed several times. Of course, the league has a very, very large buyout, and I just don't think Miami's in position to fork over that kind of money. We're talking, I think it's like a year. The operating budget is that now. It's over $1 million for sure. And so I just don't see them doing that right now. So if they were to leave the league, I think the most logical way would be is if there were some sort of agreement between leagues and said, hey, we'll let you out for this discounted fee or for nothing. We're going to bring in this team and whatever. But at this point, it's I think they're stuck at this point because they're not. I don't see them paying the buyout to leave and go to a new conference. But I also wouldn't rule out something happening. I just don't think it's imminent right now. But now that the teams have kind of gotten through the pandemic and for a couple of years there, I mean, those athletic directors were surviving on a day-to-day basis. They were just trying to get games scheduled, moved around. I don't think thinking about expansion was the last thing on their mind. They just needed to get to the next day. And now all of a sudden, I think they can start, this off season really digging different things because they've got beyond some of the day-to-day things.
I know Ed actually mentioned all the new commissioners in college hockey. What have you seen from Heather Weems in her first season as the NCHC commissioner? And how do you see maybe different leadership styles maybe than Josh Fenton had when he was running that league?
Yeah, I think the biggest, Josh was very, very hands-on across the board, everything. Especially officiating, supplemental discipline. He was at the center of basically everything in the league. So I think that's a little bit of a difference that Heather isn't quite as involved in every single aspect of things that go on. But a lot of it is, probably getting used to the role. It's her first year in it. And, I'm more curious to see where it goes after she gets kind of her feet under the first year, because, I think, anyone who's been in a new job knows how it goes. You first have to get your feet under you, and then you try to do some things. And I think we're still at step one right now.
I know you're very good at watching the national picture, not just the NCHC. What are one or two of the biggest storylines you've had your eye on all season that maybe pleasantly surprise you, maybe shock you, that's going on throughout the country?
Well, I think number one, preseason, I picked Quinnipiac to win the national title. So if I get that right, I'll have it 2 years in a row. Because last year I had Denver winning it all. So I'm as they go on this big run, I'm like, oh man, could it happen? Could I get 2 in a row right? So I've been following Quinnipiac a little bit from afar. I think the biggest story from teams has to be Alaska. This is a program that didn't play 2 years ago. I don't know who would have ever dreamed that they would be in the NCAA tournament. And right now it's looking very likely that they're going to make it. That's really one that jumps out at me right now. I think Hockey East has hit some tough times recently. And when I see the Boston schools, BU is having a bounce back year, and they're probably going to be even better next year. BC is not there yet, but they're going to be way better next year. So I see some, everything I think is cyclical. Right now we've been in a cycle where the NCHC has been pretty dominant, and, we'll see if Hockey East can push back here with some really good teams. So that's something I've definitely followed. And then, of course, from Ed's neck of the woods, it's been AIC has dominated Atlantic hockey, and all of a sudden there's RIT right there. Kind of feels like a changing of the guard. I thought maybe Michigan Tech was going to get Minnesota State and win the CCHA, and we might have a new champion there too. But no, Minnesota State still pulls it out. So I think it's interesting to see, RIT rise back up in Atlantic as well. And I know they'll have their tournament here, and that's going to be interesting to see who gets the bid.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking college hockey with you, Brad. You bring a great perspective, not just of the NCHC, but the entire picture. I'm hoping for a big North Dakota run here, because that's probably the only way we get to meet up at the Frozen Four. But even if not, it's been really fun following your work from afar this season. So obviously keep up the good work and enjoy this postseason. It should be a fun one.
It always is. Thanks for having me, guys.
That's our good friend Brad Schlossman from the Grand Forks Herald. Jim, it was interesting to me that Brad had expected a lot more turnover and a lot more teams rising up and down through the NCHC. To us watching from the outside, it seems like a changing of the guard, but maybe this is just the league getting to where it needs to be.
I agree with you. And I'll tell you, I think I went into the NCHC thinking about the league the same way that Brad did. I remember saying that you've got 8 really great teams and somebody has to finish last, which is the toughest part. I did at that time that the league was formed. I remember talking, it might have been with you or somebody else, that my concern was actually that Miami might become that doormat. And unfortunately for for that team, it's what's happened. That's a very proud program that came within seconds of a national championship back in 2009. So I do feel like it feels like there's been more parity in the league. He notes that there's only been 3 different champions. What you fail to pick up in that is that one of those teams that is not in that list is Minnesota Duluth, and they've won 2 national championships since they've been in the NCHC. So they do a great job of qualifying teams for the NCAA tournament. They do a really great job of advancing when they get to the NCAA tournament. The number of NCHC teams that have reached Frozen Fours in recent years is certainly remarkable. And that's a real credit to the league and their success. But I get it. You do feel like you thought that, 1 year you'd have Denver, the next year you'd have St. Cloud, next year you'd have North Dakota, next year after that you might get Omaha. You'd get a bunch of different champions, but I still think that there's a ton of parity in that league, that even if you don't have a bunch of 8 seeds beating 1s or 7 seeds beating 2s in the conference championship, you still have some really good hockey going on in that league.
USCHO Spotlight is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th, 2023 at Amalie Arena in Tampa. Get your tickets at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Find our podcasts at uscho.com/podcast or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Spotlight.